Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't be that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has over 4 years of law enforcement analysis experience. She spent time with the Portland Police Department in the state of Maine. She did litigation support for the Attorney General, and now she has a state gig as a threat intelligence officer. She holds a master's in criminal justice, and she's here to talk about, among other things, pivoting in one's career. Please welcome Nancy Valenti. Nancy, how are we doing?
We're doing good, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Right. So thank you. We got a lot to go over today, and very interested in your path as you spend time out of law enforcement, in law enforcement, back out of law enforcement, and now back in. And it's going to be quite a journey that you're going to take us on.
All right.
All right. Let's get started. How did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
Yeah, going back, I'm going to go back to childhood on this one. Yeah, I kind of knew there's a couple of us that go back to childhood, but I, from a young age, was interested in Scooby-Doo, so that cartoon. But I also read the Encyclopedia Brown and 1 minute or 2 minute mystery books by Donald Sobule, and that was really, really early on. So I kind of had this really inquisitive mind as a child. And it took me a long time to actually end up in the analysis field. I had two interests growing up. I basically had kind of criminal justice, and I also had motion pictures. Those were my two interests. And I went to college for business. I went to Gordon College it's the North Shore of Massachusetts. I went there for business. I did a semester in Hollywood there, and at the time we didn't really have a criminal justice major there. I still don't think Gordon has one, and I didn't really do computers at the time. But after I graduated, I thought I'd go back out to Hollywood, and I did not go back out to Hollywood. I ended up really kind of wanting to work in law enforcement, and my first job was actually for a television station, WMFP television. I was a sales assistant, and in that position I ended up putting together an advertising tracking system on the computer. So that was my first skill in computers, and I did that for a short period of time. And my boss at the time had taken me on a ride to Lynn, Massachusetts. I don't exactly know what we were doing. I think we were going to pick up a car, and I was driving him. He was an Englishman, and we got stuck in a police funeral for an officer who had passed away. And we pulled over, and there must have been 200 police cruisers with lights and sirens, and I was just kind of wowed by the whole experience. And at that point, somehow something clicked, and I was like, well, this is what I was meant to do. And shortly thereafter, I left the sales assistant job for a dispatch job with the UMass Lowell Police. I did that for a little bit. I worked all the shifts, so I was kind of a mess after 5 months, because I would do 2 overnights, I'd do a second shift, and then I'd do 2 days, all in the course of a week.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was kind of a rough go there, trying to do all those shifts. But and then I ended up in Hudson, New Hampshire at the fire department as a dispatcher for a little bit, and I enjoyed that. I liked the fire service, and I got a little bit more exposure to computers. And at that time, multimedia was just coming around, so I jumped into a program there, and I did that for a while. But I really just was gravitating towards public safety. I really wanted to do something that kind of involved computers, but also public safety, fire. Mm-hmm. And I did various web design. I worked for .com, and it was a long time. it was in my 40s when it finally clicked. I had seen Mark Stallo, who was I think he worked for Dallas, Texas. Yep. Dallas, Texas. He had posted something on a website for Tiffin University. It was the first crime analysis program that they had. He was starting it up. I think it was backed by the IACA at the time. Mm-hmm. And I started to read just the descriptions of the classes and something resonated with me right away. I mean, it was immediate. It was just kind of like, I didn't want to be a police officer. I was tired of being a dispatcher. I loved computers, and I just didn't know where I actually would fit in. And I read the description of the program at Tiffin, and it was like instant. Like I knew that that's where I wanted to go.
Nice.
And I actually filled out that application probably that night. Didn't really know how I was going to pay for grad school or anything, but I filled it out. I got accepted. I started the program in, I think it was January of 2006. I went part-time and I worked full-time. And I ended up getting my crime analysis master's degree, Master of Science, through Tiffin University. And at that point, I still didn't land a job, but I really enjoyed the program, and I was set out on the path to kind of transition from the media stuff that I was doing to crime analysis. And that proved a little bit harder than I expected because there were not a lot of positions back then. I lived in southern New Hampshire. I've been a New Englander all my life, and the great thing about New England is there's not a lot of crime. So at the time, crime analysis, there wasn't a lot of crime to analyze, and a lot of departments really didn't make that commitment to hiring full-time crime analysts. So competition was tough. Yeah. So I did interview. I actually went down. I started to apply for positions down south, like in Virginia, Baltimore, Maryland. And in 2009, so I graduated in 2007. I still hadn't landed a position yet. And I kind of did a road trip down. I had a few applications out, and then I got some interviews. So I headed down that way, and I interviewed at a couple places, Stafford County, Virginia, sheriffs, which I didn't get that job. I had an interview at Baltimore, Maryland PD. I drove right to the front door of the station, and the officer that arranged the interview had said, "Oh, don't worry, there's parking out front." I couldn't find parking, and I just kind of said, "Hey, I can't work in Baltimore, you know." So I decided to head home back to New Hampshire. Yeah, kind of felt a little defeated, but by this time it was 2009, and I had one interview pending in New Hampshire with the New Hampshire Attorney General's office. It was a grant-funded position. They had never done anything before with litigation support. They were looking for somebody to basically support the whole office, but the Criminal Justice Bureau with their homicide prosecutions. And it was a multimedia related position, which I had gone to school for part-time in the interim, and I was good with videos and things like that. And so I applied for that position, and I ended up getting hired at that job, and that ended up being a great job. I mean, I was there for close to 6 years. I was able to support criminal prosecutors in over 25 homicide trials. I went to trials. I helped start up the New Hampshire cold case unit. I actually helped assemble the website and buy the case management system. I was able to look at some of the cases and do some analysis. And I was able to make a lot of relationships with people I needed to make in order to actually get a position in crime analysis. But so the one thing I totally forgot to mention was in that kind of interview circuit that I was making, I stopped for an interview for a crime analyst position with the Portland, Maine Police Department, and this was in 2009. So I kind of ran the circuit. I went down south, came back up, went to Portland, and my final stop was the AG's office. But so Portland, Maine at the time, I think they had a position open. I believe they had over 100 applicants for that position. At the time, 2009 was kind of a rough time. I'm not exactly sure if we had some type of recession going on, but it was really difficult to land a job. The job that I had actually got with the Attorney General's office was a stimulus grant under President Obama, because they were trying to generate more jobs for the economy. So competition was pretty fierce. So you wanted to be a crime analyst, which was a rare job anyways, and then you had the competition for the regular jobs out there. So I was happy to get the interview, but they actually went with an analyst who worked up at the MIAC in Maine, and she was hired for the position. So
what is MIAC?
The MIAC is a Maine Information and Analysis Center.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Every state has one of these, what they call fusion centers. Mm-hmm. They were started after 9/11, and their task is to help connect the dots to prevent another terrorist attack from happening, because as the 9/11 happened, because there was a bunch of intelligence failures, basically. And so these fusion centers were started shortly thereafter to kind of address some of that.
Yeah. So it's fascinating. I see your pattern there of wanting to get into law enforcement and also having this desire to work for computers. I had a similar path to you. I knew that I didn't want to be an officer, but at the same time, I always had this desire to work in law enforcement, and I really enjoyed working on computers and working with data. The litigation support, that's an interesting job, and that's a great first job, let alone you already did dispatch, and that's a great opportunity as well to get your foot in the door at a police department or a law enforcement agency, is to work dispatch. But the litigation support, was it a lot of data collection? Was it a lot of production in terms of, you talked about media, were you producing a lot of products as well? What was the makeup of this job?
Yeah, I mean, so the position, actually, they hired me as what they called a training development manager, because I don't think they actually do the term litigation support manager, at the time. So they were just looking for something to meet the grant. So my job was kind of multifaceted in that I was to train all the personnel at the New Hampshire Attorney General's office in technology. Because so there was a training component, like teach them Microsoft Office, teach them their case management systems, and actually design e-learning for them to learn, and then conduct training. So there was that piece. But then there was another piece that ended up really being the prime focus of my job. We had we have several divisions at the Attorney General's office, where we have the civil division, we have the criminal justice division, other divisions in there. But when the criminal prosecutors would go to trial for homicides, they needed support in setting up projectors and kind of more of the hardware stuff. But then I was good with the video and the multimedia. So crime scene videos, just PowerPoint presentations, putting some of that together. So this is 2009, and text messages were starting to get really big. So we were getting text messages. Smart prosecutors were putting in preservation orders for text, and we would get these text messages on pieces of paper. They would come on pieces of paper and you had to get the text messages within, I think it was within less than 10 days. Like you had to be on the preservation order, or else you'd lose them. And there was so much important evidence in those text messages that they could use. So what happened is, I had one particular prosecutor who, I think he saw something in me that at first others didn't really see, and he had these great ideas. So for the text messages, for instance, to kind of give these text messages a visual look to them, so that they would impact the jury in a specific way. And I was first asked to do this with a homicide we had in 2009 that was pretty high profile. It was a random attack on a family in a small town by a bunch of teenagers. It was a very difficult case, and we really needed to use those text messages were a good portion of the evidence.
So what was the crime, and then what did you do with these text messages?
Yeah, well, the crime, unfortunately, was just a family. A mother and child had been home. The husband had been traveling, and some teenage boys. It was a group of 4 boys. I think they had just kind of planned some type of thrill burglary, and then somehow it switched into just a thrill kill. And it was, and the thing is, it's I out of respect for the family, I don't want to get in too much into the details, but it was just a very shocking. The town was in Mount Vernon, New Hampshire. It's a very small town, and it was just a shock, because New Hampshire's got this kind of small town feel. But the good thing is the daughter lived, and she survived it, which is not something that usually happens in some of these cases. The mother, unfortunately, she did not survive. And so these text messages, what happened is these teenagers texted a lot of the stuff, and this is happening a lot with crimes these days. Social media has become a very big component of most investigations. And so basically we just tried to bring awareness to the text messages. And so I would use PowerPoint or Photoshop, and I would put the images and the texts, and we would display this in court. It has to you still have to prescribed to like the best evidence rule and stuff. So these are just representations of the text, but the texts have to be introduced and the whole formal court process has to be done. But these are just visuals. So I would provide a lot of the visuals for court is what I would do. And as I got better at it, people would ask me to be involved in the next trial and the next trial. And so it ended up being that I would support a lot of trials. And it got to the point where I would be actually doing like redactions for videos and audios. And so I would be putting a lot of time into building these exhibits and then running them in the court.
When you say visual, so you have a text conversation between two people, and and then you're getting the data, so it's just between two phones. But in the video, in the visual that you would prepare for court, you're putting the person who was using the phone, their picture in there, so as you said, the jury can get a better idea that it's like this person's texting this person and this person's replying back for them, and so they get a better. It's not just data; it's actually people doing these overt acts.
Yeah, and you get to see. I think the impact of the way we did it was you could see the suspects and you could see if there was, in this case, there was no text messages to the victims, but in another case I did 5 years down the road, there was, and that case was instrumental. These text messages and everything was so instrumental in that case. But yeah, so just to make this, just gives it a little context for the jury, because people learn differently, people retain information differently. So something, you may hear something, but to have that visual with it it's impactful, and it makes an impression.
Were they convicted, the boys?
Yes. Yeah. So there were multiple trials. We had two two defendants that they both got life sentences. There were two separate trials, and then we had the other two, because I said there were four. The other two were, I think they had to plea. They ended up turning state's witness, and they plead out. So they all, as far as I know, they all served lengthy sentences, and then the two that actually committed the murder have been in prison for the rest of their lives.
Oh, that's too bad. And then, so you mentioned the other case that you worked on. With that, is that the Marriott case?
Yes, that's the Lizzie Marriott case. That was a. So I worked probably 25, 30 homicides in that I supported these cases when they went to trial. Obviously, we had trial teams. They usually consisted of two prosecutors, a victim's advocate for every case, and then myself if they needed some type of support. So I would come in. Sometimes I'd be there for the whole trial. Sometimes I wouldn't. So I worked on many, many cases while I was there, but the Marriott case was a case towards the end of my career with the AG's office that I actually spent a really long time working and basically doing a lot of exhibits for. So I think we started probably 9 months before the trial, and I did the same thing, the same thing with the text messages, arranged a bunch of exhibits. We had a lot of social media and things that we had to kind of present in a way to the jury.
Yeah. And what was the story behind this case?
Yeah, Lizzie Marriott, that was it was kind of a real a big case in that it gained a lot of media attention. It was a young college student. Lizzie was 19 years old, and she was a student at UNH, and just by some unfortunate stroke of luck, she met the wrong person, and it became, it's really hard to explain, because I think life kind of, they always say sometimes when you're working in criminal justice that some of the things that you see, you just, there's no, it almost defies explanation. So this case was just this college student had made friends with someone, and the friend that she had made friends with was dating an older man, and he just had some sick ideas in his head. So she ended up becoming an unfortunate victim to a psychopath, really. Yeah. And we didn't have, on that case, it was a challenge because we never found her body, and it's very difficult to get a first-degree murder conviction without a body. You really have to have a lot of evidence, and a lot of the evidence looks like it was circumstantial. We did have a couple of eyewitnesses, and that helped, and we did have there was some DNA evidence at the scene. So I think the prosecutors on that case did a phenomenal job with the evidence, and everybody involved in that case, they really did. And taking, as I had said, this was the same prosecutor I worked with on the initial case where I started to do those text messages, and it just phenomenal, just a phenomenal job with the whole trial and putting that evidence together in such a way. And the crime itself was just horrific. So the jury had no problem coming back with a first degree on that one.
Yeah. So and in this case, the support that you were doing was putting together these text messages, putting together the media in order to display it for court.
Yep. And then we had interviews with we had the witness, so the woman that was dating the gentleman who murdered Lizzie. She testified against him, and we had her confession. So I would synchronize the confession, the text with the video and stuff. It was just a lot of visual aids in the trial.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the whole thing's unfortunate, but the fact that you don't know the location of the body, I'm sure that haunts the family, unfortunately. It just,
Yeah.
But all right. And so we're going to try to move on from that. Sometimes it's hard to transition in these things, but we're going to transition now because you eventually do get a analyst job with Portland, right? You'd mentioned it before. You didn't get the job in 2009, but then it comes back around later.
Yep, it came back around in 2016. So as I was doing this work with the AG's office, I just explained that I had worked this one case. There's always a case when you're working in the criminal justice field that kind of, I would say it almost wrecks you in a sense, right? It kind of, at that point, I think things kind of turn and you kind of want to do something else. And so I actually, through my contacts at the state of New Hampshire, I was actually, for a brief period of time, I transitioned over to the New Hampshire IAC, which is basically the MIAC, but in New Hampshire. They had actually reached out. They had a GIS job over there, and they had reached out to me. I was kind of burned out on the trials, and I jumped at the chance because this was my chance to now kind of get into the analytical side of things. So I went over there for 9 months, and at the time, I had a friend up in Portland, Maine. I had gone up there to visit, and we had been walking in front of the police station in Portland, and I told her, 2009, I had an interview here. They had a crime analyst job, and I really would have liked to have gotten this job, and didn't think anything of it. But something prompted me to actually look on their website the next morning, and the crime analyst job was posted. So I took that as a sign from the universe that I was supposed to apply.
Yeah, that is, man, you have these sometimes very strange, maybe considered wild ideas, and every once in a while when it's like, oh my gosh, like that, I can only put myself in your shoes and be thinking about that as like waking up in the morning and actually seeing that position posted on the website.
It was just kind of like, okay, what do I do with this, right? I mean, I can't let this go. So I told my friend, and I said, I'm going to apply. And so I did. I think about 6 weeks went by. I didn't hear anything. And then it was February. So I think I had seen the position posted, I think at like early December. And I got the call in February. And I was living in New Hampshire. The job was in Portland, Maine. And I went up for the day. I went to the interview, and the next day I got a call back. So I interviewed.
Nice.
I interviewed with a chief and a couple other folks. I had said that I had been here before. I was here in 2009. I didn't get hired, and I was coming back. So I basically said, I'm back here. So, and I had the experience now. When I first interviewed in 2009, I just had the degree, right? And now I've got 5.5 years of experience with the AG's office. I'm working homicide cases. I helped with the cold case unit. And then I had I was over at the New Hampshire Information Analysis Center doing GIS for their fusion center. So I had kind of built the background that I needed to actually probably get the job this time. And
Yeah.
luckily the chief saw it that way, and they extended me the offer.
Nice. So I think it's interesting coming in from the attorney side of things, right?
Yeah.
I've had several folks on the show that were dispatchers, and we've talked how that transitions very well into analysis in terms of knowing the data. But for you, coming in and working so many years with the prosecution and just knowing what it takes to get evidence ready to display in court had to be a tremendous advantage for you as you're now going into this police department role as an analyst.
Yeah, I think for Portland, they didn't make a lot of use of me in that way, because the job that I did in Portland, it was pretty much an open book for me. Like, I could have made the job anything I wanted, but I really wanted to do the tactical crime analysis. I really wanted to help out patrol. And of course, I answered to the chief directly. So there was a lot of administrative and strategic as well. But I was so excited to actually get in on the tactical side that I was ready to leave kind of the exhibit stuff behind,
Yeah.
But I really didn't, because, as I rolled out products, I ended up revising their intranet site to make it more visual. So I would use the kind of the presentation skills I had in just different ways.
Yeah. No, I do want to go down the path of tactical analysis, but before we do, the chief, you reported right to the chief. What were the chief's expectations, or what was there particular issues that the chief wanted you to work on?
So the chief is Michael Soschuk. He's actually commissioner of public safety now with the state of Maine. But at the time, I think one of the great things you hear a lot about, I know through my time with the IACA and in the community, crime analysts who don't have the backing of a police chief or report to the top sometimes can struggle a little bit for acceptance, I think, right? I mean, I've heard that. I don't know if it's true nowadays, but back then it was kind of like if you reported to the police chief, some of your work got to be taken a little bit more seriously, right? So he didn't really have any expectations like I could do what I wanted. But we had a big challenge in Portland. So my first day on the job, I walk in there, I'm all excited. I got all this computer skills. I can't wait to get all this state-of-the-art data and all the computers. And I remember the training officer, he sat me down at this computer, and it was a black screen with green letters. That basically was like DOS.
Yeah.
So this is 2016, and I am staring at a records management system that is 25 years old. I joke now, but I found a Facebook memory the other day. It's a long time out, but it rolled back. And apparently my friend had to actually drive me back to the police department that first week because I don't think I wanted to go back. After seeing the what I had to work with, I was a little bit worried. So the chief's expectations of me were really just be able to work with this 25-year-old records management system to get him the data that he needed to run his department. And I spent a lot of time wrestling with data just to get him. One of the first things that I changed when I got there, and it took me a while to figure out processes, was the CompStat process that they had.
Yeah. Now, did they still have RMS when you left, or was there an upgrade?
Yeah. So we were so I was there for 3.5 years, and we were just in negotiations with new RMS vendors.
So that's like 2019, right?
Yeah.
So 2019 and still have a DOS RMS.
I followed the progress through the years, and it took them a few years after I left before they actually got things switched over.
Yeah. Oh,
man. And I ended up training the analyst that replaced me. We had a community policing coordinator who was going to school for I think intelligence analysis, and I found out about that, and I actually got a job at the feds doing litigation support again. So I for more money. So I decided to take that. And so I reached out to her and I said, hey, I'm going to be leaving. How about I show you the ropes here? And if you want to apply for my position, you'll have kind of a leg up. So I did. I trained her and she ended up getting the position.
And her name?
Her name was Kelly Crotty.
You didn't do the dishes?
Well, no, I was busy doing other chores. But my completed chores is up 5 in the last 7 days.
Yeah, but you're still down 13 over the last 28 days.
Well, I see your shopping purchases is up 20% this month.
My spending is still down year to date. In fact, my black shoe purchases are half of what they were this time last year.
Well, thank goodness last year wasn't a normal year.
Plus, I bought you new underwear, so your clothes purchases is up 40% this month compared to last month.
Oh, wait, there were no clothes purchases the previous month, Miss Perfect. I didn't know you had the ability to divide by 0.
You should be happy. Your temperature-led policing program has worked great in this house. I have not touched your precious thermostat in the last 6 months.
Millions of homes in the U.S. are impacted by people wanting to be comfortable in their homes. Temperature-led policing. Control the temperature, control the cost.
Hi, this is Jeffrey Vandersip, and I'm going to tell you about a couple of my pet peeves. Pet peeve number 1 is the size of parking lots at grocery stores. They create these parking lots for Yugos, and yet everybody is now driving a Ford F-150, and you can't fit in anything, or if you do, you're banging the doors of your neighbors. Pet peeve number 2 is the little button in cars that open the fuel filler door. Seems to be in the most oddest of places. And whenever I go somewhere else and I rent a car and I have to go to the gas station for the first time, I spend a half hour trying to figure out how to open the fuel filler door. Pet peeve number 3 is just packaging generally with things that you get in the mail. It's like Russian nesting dolls. You've got a box, and inside that box is another box. Inside that is another box. Inside that is a bubble wrap. And then you get to like a little piece of whatever, which is the thing actually sent. And finally, and again, betraying my age here, the screen filters that people use in their social media, everybody kind of looks like somebody out of Avatar. What's up with that?
All right. So let's go down the litigation. I mean, no, not litigation. You got me saying litigation now. Let's go down the tactical analysis side there. Let's you said you had a couple of stories for us. So we're going to call this the analyst badge story. And for those that may be new to the show, the analyst badge story is the career-defining case or project that you worked. So yeah, so just to go ahead and tell us your badge story.
Yeah, well, so I had a couple stories, but one of the stories that I was kind of proud of is I learned the records management system. I was pretty good at it. I think I was able to get them to buy me something that gave me a little bit more visibility into the narratives of the cases, because I had to use something that was very similar to Crystal Reports to pull a lot of my stats. But an analyst really relies on kind of the narratives to kind of give you your intel on certain things, and that was actually hard to extract from our system. But I had gotten a call from the neighboring town, Falmouth, Maine. It's a small town. One of the detectives had reached out and had said they had some vandalism to a new housing development, and this is kind of an affluent town, so vandalizing somebody's brand new home that's probably $1 million was kind of a big deal. And he asked me if I had anything I could give him that might point towards a suspect. And so I went through the records management system, and sure enough, I found a tag. I was looking for somebody that was tagging buildings. I found somebody had tagged a building on a street that was kind of in coming, like that's how you get to this town, right? So so I had seen that he had tagged that building, but he was a pretty far ways away from where the actual vandalism occurred. So I mentioned it to the detective, and they ran with it. They actually ran with it. I'm not exactly sure how they ended up tying it together, but they were able to get, I think, some surveillance video off of somebody's some home, and he actually lived apparently the 2 or 3 streets over. So his
Oh, wow.
parents, his parents lived in the town that he tagged. It was only 2 streets over, and I think he borrowed like their minivan or something. So so he ended up getting caught. So that was kind of cool because it wasn't even my town, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to find that little piece of evidence that actually led to a suspect being found for a case that normally not a lot of taggers get caught.
Yeah, no, it is. But at the same time, it's right. It's still a great feeling to contribute.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To know that you did your part to help solve crime.
Yeah. Yeah. I had another one too. I think part of being an analyst, one of the things I did is I had to know like everything that was going on in town. Like Portland, I knew it. If it was in the news, I knew it. I remember Chris Bruce used to be a crime analyst in Danvers when I was kind of up and coming, and I remember he used to read every police report.
Yep.
And I think he used to read the news. So I got into that habit too. But I was actually on my way into work one day and I was listening to the news and I happened to catch that South Portland they had arrested 2 guys for, I think they robbed a CVS or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it just happened to catch it. I had just arrived at the parking lot. I caught that little tidbit of information and I went in to start my day. And as I was reviewing my police reports for the day, I saw that we had I think it was like a pizza delivery guy robbed by 2 men the night before. And I was just like, what are the chances that these two clowns, right, hit the pizza guy up at whatever time it was? And so I went upstairs and I went to the detective and I said, hey, have you got any suspects on this armed robbery? And he hadn't had any suspects. And I said, well, South Portland just pinched these 2 guys for getting the CVS. And sure enough, those were the 2 guys. So
nice.
Yeah. I didn't get any credit for it. The detective took all the credit, but yeah.
No, hey, again, you're contributing. Like, hey, by the way, I heard this. So
yeah. And it, as I got the reputation for knowing stuff, people would come down to the office. I was I was seated kind of in the patrol area, which was nice because that's a great place for a crime analyst to be, because you get to hear what's going on. And patrol officers would come by and they'd ask for help and stuff. So, I think I really enjoyed doing that. And it's funny, I've been gone from the police department now since September of 2019. I still walk down the streets. Police officers still stop and wave. I had a couple police officers last year say, "Why don't you come back?" They do a lot of details at Whole Foods, and I had a couple of the younger guys, the officers that just kind of graduated from the academy, and they're like, "We loved your maps. We loved knowing where crime was happening. We don't get that now, and we loved it." And that's huge, because if you got an officer like 4 years after you've been gone saying, "We really liked this," it makes you feel good.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That is awesome. So, all right, well, let's move on. You had mentioned going to the feds and doing litigation, and you were only there a short time, but it kind of went home again. And so, was it the example of you really can't go home again?
Yeah, it pretty much. Yeah, there was something about working for Portland PD. When I left, it was kind of, I had to go home. You get offered a job, you get offered more money. I had gone back to New Hampshire. My parents were aging. So I kind of made the decision, it's time to go home. And, the pandemic hit, so that kind of changed everything. There was no court anymore, so I wasn't really going to court. I was doing a lot of e-discovery type stuff, so I wasn't really doing the stuff that I enjoyed by being in court and stuff. So things kind of changed, and but what happened is, as part of my professional development, I had a little bit of an interest in digital forensics. Again, going back to the kind of the court stuff, and so I started, as part of my PDP, to take some classes at Champlain College in digital forensics. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, but I just had an interest in it. And I ended up getting a graduate certificate in that recently. And I started seeing these cyber threat intelligence jobs. And I was like, what is this? Cyber threat intel. This kind of sounds interesting. I know intelligence analysis. I know crime analysis. And the more I I looked into it, the more I said, wow, this is fascinating. I've never considered myself to work in cybersecurity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cyber, you always kind of think, oh, you really got to know programming. You really have to know this stuff. And so I kind of dabbled in applying for a couple of these cyber intel jobs, saying, well, I was a crime analyst, and I didn't get any bites, but I kept kind of researching and saying, well, what's in this? What can I take from my background, and what do I need to learn? And ultimately, what happened is it was kind of this, it's kind of like the Portland moment with the crime analyst job. I kept seeing this job posting in my state for a cyber threat intelligence officer, and the job was posted in December. And then the job got posted again in like 3 months later. And then the job got posted another 6 months later. Like, they couldn't fill this job. And I had been, in my spare time, I had been kind of upping my skills in this area, like I went online and I would do these cybersecurity, I think they call them like capture the flags and things. So I was starting to teach myself more about the cyber threat intel. And then I realized that being a crime analyst, being an intelligence analyst, and being a cyber threat intelligence analyst, they actually share the same skills. When you're a crime analyst, your job is to collect data, collate that data, analyze it, and then disseminate it out so that you give your patrol officers and your chief actionable and relevant data so they can do their jobs. Cyber intelligence is exactly the same. They do exactly the same things. You collect data, you analyze it, you disseminate it, and then the cyber teams use it to fight cyber threat actors. So it's so similar in skill set.
All right. So then you finally land a gig,
I did.
and that's what you're doing now. So you have a great opportunity that you're building this program from the ground up.
Yep. Yeah. So basically, the job that I said kept getting posted, eventually I kind of looked at it and said, well, nobody else is going to apply for it, so this must be your job, right?
Yeah.
And I put in for it, and sure enough, I got it. And I was excited. It's just something that I think I loved being a crime analyst, but at the same time, being a crime analyst, there's only so far you can go with that. I think you can love it and you can do it your whole career, but like in Portland's pretty small. You can't really go anywhere else. You can't. So it depends on how they use it. But even salary wise, you can't really go too far. The cyber industry is just huge. The thing I love about it is there is so much work, and there's so much data, and there's just so many paths to doing this. I'm just a subset of like this huge machine that is trying to fight people that we don't even like ever see. So yeah, so my job at this particular juncture is to actually build a cyber intelligence program from the ground up.
Wow, that's quite a task there. So
Yeah.
what's your plan?
Yeah. Well, anytime, even in Portland, I kind of had to redo things the way they were doing. So I'm always challenged by building things from the ground up. I always find that I love just kind of doing things. And like you, with your business intel background now, I tend to kind of think the same way. I like technology. I like research. And so my plan really is, at this point, I've just done a ton of research. I've been there for 5 months. I've done a ton of research. I've learned everything I can possibly know about the cyber intelligence process, the life cycle, the requirements, who my stakeholders are. And basically, so the first 6 months have just been really a ton of learning, basically understanding how things work, watching a lot of seminars, things like that. And then I'll be working with a consultant to kind of shore up some of this, build policies, build procedures, hire some staff, and hopefully take this thing all the way.
All right. So now what always fascinates me about the cyber threat stuff is really how departments or law enforcement tries to handle it, right? It's, you get small town police department gets this cyber fraud case on their lap, and it's like, okay, that's not enough. Like, the victims in our jurisdiction, but as you mentioned, the the suspect is who knows where, and how are we going to go about investigating this?
Yeah.
And so at the state level, does it, and it's still very early, at the state level, does it feel like that's where it should go? Like these cases should be at the state level and be able to use the resources at the state level as opposed to at the individual city police departments or small town police departments?
Yeah, so states don't necessarily prosecute cybercrime. Really, all cyber threat intelligence is being able to kind of stay on top, because as every day, like new ransomware comes out, right? Every day, cyber threat actors, whether they be what we call nation states, which are China, Russia, all these countries, basically nation states, they hire teams of hackers. Sometimes it's the military themselves whose efforts they basically try to get into our networks for cyber espionage purposes, or possibly even cyber warfare. So you have those level of threat actors, which we don't prosecute. I haven't heard of that happening yet. But then you have your everyday script, they call them script kiddies, where just maybe a kid just playing around and hacking into systems. And then you have people who commit large amounts of cyber fraud or hold, unfortunately, it seems to be happening a lot more. I've seen quite the increase this year in just ransomware attacks. So they get into somebody's network, and then they exfiltrate data, and then they hold them for ransom. And local police departments are not really equipped, in many cases, to investigate that. Where I'd seen in Portland, where they actually investigated some of that stuff, was on the credit card level, where somebody would skim a gas pump, and then their credit cards would be basically duplicated, and then the victim of the fraud would come to the police and file a report. But not a lot of stuff is done with that. So a lot of the cyber crimes get escalated to the federal, the FBI and CISA, all that, Interpol sometimes. So a lot of these cyber crimes that kind of cross these geopolitical borders and end up, a lot of this is investigated by the feds now.
Yeah, we had a local hospital here in Tallahassee had that with the ransomware, and they were down. They went back to pen and paper for months.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's so costly. So the role of a threat intelligence analyst at most companies, and if you're fortunate enough to be like a state or local place that has a threat intelligence person, really the job is to just be the eyes and ears, and stay up on their tactics, their techniques and procedures, which is basically the modus operandi of criminals. It's just the cyber actors' modus operandi, where you keep and it's mind-boggling how many there are and how many different ways there is. And of course, some program is involved, so sometimes it goes over your head. But really, it's a research role, in that you are just trying to stay ahead of what's happening and be on the pulse of that. So it's exactly like being a crime analyst. You're basically collecting information all day long, and just being able to, oh, I remember this, and oh, this sounds familiar, because a lot of the threat actors are the same.
Yeah. So are you also helping out local jurisdictions work with the feds, right? Because as you mentioned, most of these cyber threats get pushed to the federal level.
Yeah, no, I mean, at this point, we haven't had any type of interaction with government or anything. We're still kind of in the infancy of starting up. So, you know how we have the MIAC and the New Hampshire IAC and all these fusion centers? They basically have fusion centers now for cyber too. They call them ISACs. So they kind of, they're all axed, right?
Yeah.
ACs. So the maritime industry has an ISAC, the financial industry has an ISAC, the government has an ISAC, and public safety, actually, there's a good plug. Motorola has a ISAC for public safety. So any public safety agency out there, anywhere, dispatch, police, they can join this ISAC through Motorola for free, no cost, and they can get access to intel on cyber threats. Because a lot of we've seen, like you said, the hospitals were attacked. Well, we've seen public safety dispatch centers come down. We've seen full towns come down, and usually it's from some type of exposed web panel or edge. They call them edge devices or firewall drive. Something gets exposed, and a threat actor is able to somehow get in there. So really, a cyber analyst or cyber intel analyst, their job is to just kind of keep an eye on the pulse of this stuff, be able to disseminate that information through bulletins, just like we would do in crime analysis. And then they also have these things called IOCs, which are just like a criminal leaves footprints at a crime scene, or they leave something at a crime scene. These cyber actors leave what we call IOCs, incidents of compromise. So they leave little clues that they've been in your system, and so there's some of that threat hunting that goes on too.
Yeah, and do they do that on purpose, or is that not something they're trying to leave evidence behind?
No, they do try to erase their track sometimes, but with computers, there's always a log. So a lot of times this evidence is left by logs, IP addresses. When we've had crimes where if a local police department has a crime that involves like a computer, a lot of times that detective will subpoena the internet service provider and get that IP address. So all the IP addresses, those types of things figure into the IOCs. So you leave a mark pretty much everywhere you go.
All right. So if you're a law enforcement analyst listening to this, what message do you have for them in terms of cyber threat intelligence?
One of the things that I wish that I had known when I was a crime analyst is there's a lot of open source tools out there. Open source, they call them OSINT tools. I didn't do a lot of OSINT when I was a crime analyst, but there are some fantastic tools that cyber intelligence analysts use that crime analysts can use. So I would look into OSINT. Maltego is a fantastic tool. It's very similar to I2 Analyst Notebook, which is very expensive. I remember always looking to try to get an I2 Analyst Notebook, and I did get it, but it was pretty complicated to learn. But every analyst wants to be able to do analysis and linked analysis and that type of stuff. In Maltego, there's a free version, so it's a community version. You can do some basic blockchain. You can actually do analysis on blockchains. You can do those visual charts, the link charts. So there's a lot that crime analysts can get from cyber OSINT. And so I would expand their OSINT skills if they can. And on YouTube, you can type in OSINT and you can find YouTube videos on everything. There is so much training documents that people put out there, and on LinkedIn as well. So I think any crime analyst should really kind of look into the cyber and grab some knowledge and some of those tools.
Yeah. Plenty of open source material on open source. All right. And we'll just stick with the advice. And I'm curious, you went to Tiffin. We mentioned that in the beginning of the interview. You got your master's degree. And it's been a little bit since you got that degree. But as you look back now at Tiffin and that master's program, do you think it's beneficial? Is there some things that you would change? Would you recommend it for analysts?
Yeah. I mean, now if I had to do it again, I still, at the time I had my bachelor's degree, right? And I didn't have a lot of experience with computers at that point. So the master's degree made the most sense for me at the time. Now there are community colleges out there. I think there's one in New York, Herkimer Community College, that has an associate degree crime analysis program, criminal justice program. It really depends, because I came into crime analysis, I was in my early 40s. So I had done 20 years of work, not really knowing what I wanted to do, or just kind of bouncing around, but always kind of having that kind of, there was that passion and that desire to, I knew kind of where I fit and where I didn't, right? You can tell where you fit somewhere when you get there and the time goes by. Like at the AG's office, 6 years practically went by before, like, I didn't even know it. It just, it was so quick. And 3.5 years at Portland went by like that. And I can already feel that that's happening in the position I'm in now, which I really, really love. And I can see myself retiring from that position because there's just so much to learn. But it depends on where somebody is in their career journey. Like if if you're a high school student and you want to go down this road, I would say try to get into a crime analysis program right out of the gate, because you really need to learn the basics, and by the basics, what crime analysis is, what criminal justice skills, ethics. You need GIS. That's a big one. I think GIS, if anybody wants to be a crime analyst, GIS skills are they're going to give you the edge, whether the department makes use of it or not. But GIS was vitally important to me. I had taken a couple classes at Northeastern University in GIS, so I knew exactly how to make maps, and I was able to do some apps. So I think a lot of the technology is out there now. But the other thing I would say is, beyond that, if you've already got a degree and it's not quite in crime analysis and you want to pivot, I mean, like, you're in business intelligence analysis, data analytics, those skills are all the skills an analyst needs. But I think what happens is, when people apply for jobs, if you're not already a crime analyst, or if you don't have like something on your resume, a lot of times you don't get the chance. So you need to kind of what we call in cyber intelligence, when you're researching something, a lot of times you have a hypothesis and then you pivot you get a clue and then you pivot to something else. I kind of call job searching the same way. Like, you can pivot. Basically, you just find something that you can pivot off of. So you find a skill that you can kind of pivot to the next job. So data analytics, crime analysis is data analytics, but in order to do that, sometimes you got to learn new skills. So a certificate program is great. If you're in California, they have all those criminal justice certificates through. Those are fantastic. So if you've already got your degree, try to get a certificate. You don't have to spend all that money on your master's degree. A certificate is just as good, but you really do need to get the skills. And then if you can get an internship or volunteer or just get into, a police agency, that will help, because it's the references you need. You kind of have to become a known commodity. People get to know your work one way or the other. So if you're not doing crime analysis, like I was doing litigation support, but people saw that the work I did, and they knew who I was, and that helped.
Yeah, and I think it's, in your case, you're a great example of this. That the titles of some of these positions matter, right?
Yes.
If you were on a job search and you're only putting in like analysis and law enforcement or crime or intelligence analysis, you would totally miss that litigation support, most likely. Right.
Yep.
And then, so that is what you're looking for, is opportunity to grow, even if it's not exactly what you want to do at the moment. You can still have your goal to be an analyst. But I think that opportunity to be part of that litigation support really paid dividends for you down the road.
Yeah, I mean, it was a life-changing role for me in just so many ways, because it just expanded just everything about my life, and it made me just realize like how important life is. And I really felt a sense of pride being a part of that for as long as I was, and that's something I'll carry with me, forever. But for anybody that wants to get into this field, it's never too late, right? A lot of people are like, oh, I'm too old. It's never too late to change careers. Don't get stuck in something you don't want to do. You just be enthused about doing something new. And I think if you have that passion, somebody out there is going to recognize that and give you a chance. But for me, I mean, if you look at it, I had my degree in 2007. I wanted to be a crime analyst so bad in 2007, and it just didn't happen. It took me almost 9 years before I actually got an analyst job, right?
Yeah.
And then it took me walking away from it for more money to realize that this is what I love more than anything, is being able to. Being an analyst it just requires a different skill set, and I think it's a well-rounded skill set. So you research, you learn, and I love to learn. And I think anybody that wants to be an analyst of any type has to love to learn, especially if you want to be in cyber. But always be open, Jason, because I think we don't know what the job market is going to be like in 10 years. Like, AI is taking over now. So always be open to learning new things, and you'll always have an opportunity to find a job you like.
Yeah. I'm interested in your take on the interview, the actual interview. because you've obviously gone through several interviews over your career,
Mm-hmm.
and even the most recent one. So do you feel that maybe either your strategy is the interview just an interview, or is the interview process or the actual interview really changed over the years?
Yeah, I mean, if you're lucky enough to get an interview,
Mhm.
because I was interested in law enforcement at a young age, I did police tests. I didn't even get into that, but I did some oral boards with some. I think I had an oral board once with 6 police officers, sergeants. I had people screaming at me, everything, right? Yeah. The more interviews you do, the more comfortable you get. And I think one of the things about interviews is, one, be prepared. Like, you got to know your stuff. Like, if you learn your subject matter and you know it and you understand it, or you're attempting to know it, it's going to come off in an interview. And people do get nervous in interviews and stuff, but I think the important thing is just be yourself, be your authentic, true self, and just talk to people, because all an interview is talking to people. So, and it's hard for people to do. I actually had a friend, her son wanted a job, so I actually coached him a little bit on an interview he did, and he rocked it. It's just he's still in college. He's applying for an internship, and you just learn a few things. Make sure you know what you're talking about. If you don't, say you don't, and just be yourself. And I think he did a great job.
Nice. All right. Well, let's move on to personal interest then. And you're still learning. You still have your goals here, and
Yep.
you are studying Qigong.
Qigong. Yep. Yeah, about 5 years ago when I was in Portland, a friend of mine introduced me to Tai Chi and Qigong. And I was kind of one of these people like, oh, I don't need yoga. Just, I don't know. There was something, I think when you're in this field, meditation, mindfulness, all that stuff, you kind of don't think you need it. And I started it, and I really like it. So Qigong is kind of a cousin of Tai Chi. It's easier to do. Tai Chi's more like they got more steps, and you gotta shift your weight a certain way and stuff like that. So Qigong is kind of a cousin of it, but it's basically it's an energy work. You work with your energy, but you move, and it's all about relaxation. And so I had started this 5 years ago. I've been continuing to do it. And one of the things I've done up here in Maine is I've kind of tapped into a few people up here that are into first responder wellness. We don't talk a lot about the toll that the job can take on first responders, police, fire, EMS, especially after the pandemic. So first responder wellness has kind of come to the forefront, where before people used to say, well, stuff your feelings down, suck it up, buttercup, that kind of stuff. And first responder wellness is really important. Keeping a balance in your life between work and home and just staying healthy. And Qigong is something that I just enjoy, and it really has helped me to get grounded and centered. So one of my goals now that I've got the career I want, now that I'm back in the field, now I don't feel like I have to strive for getting anywhere, I can kind of enjoy things. And one of the things that I want to do is become a Qigong instructor and be able to work with police and firefighters and dispatchers, and maybe teach them Qigong to keep their stress levels down.
That's a noble cause. Very
Thank
good.
you.
All right. Well, our last segment to the show is Words to the World. This is where you can promote any idea that you wish. Nancy, what are your words to the world?
I am going to quote Bruce Lee. I've been reading Bruce Lee books the last couple weeks, and it's basically along the Qigong Taoist philosophy is be like water. And water is flexible. It can move through any obstacle, and it's a great way to live your life. And that's what I would say to anybody out there.
Very good. Well, I leave every guest with you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later. But I do appreciate you being on the show, Nancy. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. You can show your support by sharing this and other episodes found on our website at www.leapodcasts.com. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or have a suggestion for our next guest, please send us an email at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Till next time, analysts, keep talking.